Thank you. Well, follow that. Congratulations, Chifa, I think his nickname is. But thank you. It's wonderful to be back in Uruguay. And actually, this is my last presentation representing New Zealand, because those of you who understand accents will know that I'm not from New Zealand. And as my bio shows, I actually came originally from England. And just next week, when I've been back in New Zealand for one night, I will be moving back to England. So it's a real privilege to make my last presentation here in Uruguay, having spent 15 wonderful years supporting our beef and sheep farmers in New Zealand. And I can only recommend to you that you go to the 2020 conference. It's a wonderful country. I went for 1 year and stayed 15. I lived near Queenstown, and you're going to have an absolute blast. They're a wonderful nation, wonderful people, so make sure you go. And now that little ad break is over, we're going to move the focus from one end of the supply chain. We've been focusing on genetics this morning and this afternoon, and we're going to move to the wonderful product that you produce at the end of that chain, the meat. And I'm going to be looking at, as my presentation says, why beef is important, whatever your age. We know that we've been eating meat for millions of years. This is a picture of the oldest skull that was discovered in Chad in Africa, and they've dated it around 7 million years old. And we know that man at that time was eating meat because of the teeth. Those canine teeth indicate they were meat eaters. And we today still have teeth that reflect the fact that we should be eating meat as well as vegetables. So we have incisors and for meat as well, and then we have molars which are there for grinding vegetables. We also have 1 kilogram of bacteria in our gut that are simply there for processing meat. And we also have certain enzymes that are specifically designed for digesting meat. So we know that we've been eating meat for a long time, and we're still designed to eat it. In terms of Hereford beef, we know that Hereford beef has been contributing to our diet for over 200 years. This is a picture of a sign outside a farm in Herefordshire that belongs to some friends of mine and will be known to many of the Brits here today, the Norman family, who still have cattle from the oldest herd in the world from the 1780s. So we know that your animals have been contributing for such a long time. So what I'm going to do is talk about what nutrients there are in meat that are so important to us. Now, this list is not exhaustive. It's just a few of the key nutrients that I've picked out. And what I want to do is go through each of the life stages of humans. I have had to clarify that for a few people. And pick out a nutrient that's particularly important. But I think I'll be able to show you that actually most of these are important most of the time. But I'm just going to highlight a few that are a specific need. So the thing about beef, a lot in a little. And starting with pregnancy, this is a time, obviously, of rapid growth. In 9 months, we go from woe to go in terms of producing a new human being. And blood volume, the blood volume of a pregnant woman doubles during pregnancy. And so iron is the particularly key issue that I'm going to highlight for pregnancy, because the iron requirements are so high during this time. Now, this is a comparison between the amount of iron you get in that 120-gram beef steak is the same amount as you get from a whole kilogram of spinach. Now, frankly, I know which I'd prefer to eat, or which would be easier to eat, in fact. But the reason for that is the type of iron that you find in meat is much more easily used by the body than the type of iron that's found in vegetables. So we use about 25% of the iron found in meat. We only use about 5% of the iron found in vegetables. So you can get iron from veg, but you need to work an awful lot harder. So definitely iron is needed in pregnancy. Once the baby's born, its birth weight triples in the first year. So that for any of you that have had children, you'll know this is a time, again, of rapid growth. A baby's also born with 1 billion brain cells, and they're going to be no good to us unless they connect with each other. I'm sure right now some of mine are disconnecting, but we have to try and help them connect. And this is where the importance of omega-3s come in. And I thought I'd just take a few minutes at this point to talk about the difference between beef from animals raised on grass and grain. It was one of the things that I was asked to cover. There are omega-3s in all beef. So all beef makes an important contribution to our omega-3 intakes. The thing about meat from, or beef from animals raised on grass is the content per 100 grams is higher, but the total fat content is usually lower. And so when you compare beef from animals raised on grain compared to animals raised on grass, if you were to compare the same cut between the two, the omega-3 levels are fairly similar. So my advice would be, yes, promoting the presence of omega-3s in beef is an important thing to do. And for those of you that are using pasture-fed systems, yes, you can say that there's a good level of omega-3s, but just be a little bit wary when you're trying to make direct comparisons, because actually, as I say, because the total fat content of meat from grain-fed animals is higher, then when you look cut by cut, then they're not hugely dissimilar. There are also things that change those omega-3 levels. So the type of pasture that the animals are being grazed on, the season, all those sorts of things do cause some variability. And we also need to be mindful that we will never have an omega-3 content in meat that's going to be as high as fish. But many of us do not eat anything like as much fish as we do beef. So we know that meat makes an important contribution. The Australians have shown very clearly that beef and lamb contribute 30% of their omega-3 intake in their population, which is a really impressive amount to be contributing. So a good contributor, and as we said, very important, particularly in young children. Toddlers, this is an age where actually nutritional deficiencies are quite a worry. Again, for those of you that have children, you'll know that this can be a time when they start to let you know who's boss, particularly in the meal table, because it's a time when they can have some control over what they do. And so many toddlers will become quite fussy about what they're eating. The other thing is that if they've been breastfed or fed infant formula, they will often come off those milks in toddlerhood and start drinking normal cow's milk. And cow's milk does not have the same iron and zinc content than those other milks. And therefore, we actually see higher levels of zinc, particularly zinc and iron insufficiency in toddlers than we do in babies. So particularly important to try and encourage young children to be eating meat. We can start, in most countries, the recommendation would be to start feeding food from around 6 months, and meat should be one of those first foods, and particularly important, as we say, for toddlers. Okay, we get on into children, and they're still growing rapidly. And kids, protein is something that is really important at all these ages to help us grow. The thing about the protein in meat is that the protein is what we call complete. So protein's made up of a lot of different units called amino acids, and we get all the essential amino acids in meat. We don't in non-meat sources. So if you're eating lentils, for example, you need to eat rice with it to make that complete. If you're eating baked beans, you need to have them on toast to make it complete. With meat, the protein is complete already. So really important for kids, again, to be eating protein. And I thought I'd just share with you the new TV ad that's been produced in New Zealand, because this is exactly what that's focusing on, is about the importance of protein for children's growth.
When I grow up, I want to be a Astronaut. Theory. Artist. Teacher. Airplane pilot. Street plane pilot. A helicopter. A mummy.
If they've got big goals, they need good tucker. Look for the quality mark and feed them up with New Zealand beef and lamb for the protein they need to grow.
I'll be a dinosaur when I grow up. Wow!
Beef and lamb, it's the way to grow, New Zealand.
I'm not surprised if the translator didn't manage to translate what those children were saying. Even I find it difficult. But basically, they're all talking about what they want to be. And that the voiceover at the end, that one or two who know him might recognise, that's actually the CEO of Beef and Lamb in New Zealand that did that voiceover. And all those children are either the children or grandchildren of staff at Beef and Lamb. We're very into keeping our costs down and being as efficient as we can. But the essence of that is basically protein. It's the way to grow, and eating beef and lamb is obviously an important way to achieve that. Then teenagers. Well, this is a busy time. For any of you that can think back that far, or may even not be quite so far away from it as I am, it's a busy time physically and emotionally. Often this is when particularly boys grow, have a bit of a growth spurt, and obviously all teenagers are going through puberty. So I've gone back to highlighting iron again here because for teenage women, once they start menstruating, their iron requirements increase dramatically. And it's also timely to be here this week because this is World Iron Awareness Week. And some of your promotional bodies, meat organisations like Beef and Lamb New Zealand, I think probably MLA in Australia, and probably Canada Beef are involved with this Iron Awareness Week. So it's a particular time to highlight the needs of teenage women. Now, one of the problems with iron deficiency is the symptoms are quite hard to pick. Tiredness, grumpiness, irritability. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Which teenage girl is not irritable and grumpy? Doesn't necessarily mean to say she's iron deficient, but she could be. So it's something to really focus on. And it's also a time when girls particularly sometimes experiment with leaving various foods out of their diet. And we know which one is the one they often choose. So particularly important for teenagers. So adults, this is where most of us sit, I think. It is a time of changing needs. I've highlighted a wide range of nutrients here because we're talking about a large number of years. Iron and zinc, very important for young adults. Zinc particularly for men with fertility. Iron continuing to be important for women going through their childbearing years. But I've highlighted selenium because we're actually only designed to live till we're 30 or 40 years old. And I know most of us are above that age now. And selenium is an important antioxidant that helps us fight against the degenerative diseases that our age we're increasingly susceptible to. So selenium, very important, and meat is the major contributor to our selenium intakes. So meat and bread probably are the two highest. So again, very important. And then when we grow a little older, and I'm not going to specify a particular age here for fear of offending, the importance for older adults is adding quality to quantity. So if you're 60, 70, 80, you've got plenty of quantity of life. We want to add quality to that life. And this stage is all about maintaining good health and trying to prevent illness. The other thing that happens from about the age of 60 onwards is we start not absorbing nutrients quite so well. And vitamin B12 is a classic example. Many of you will probably know older people who are receiving B12 supplements or injections because we just don't absorb it well enough. But one of the good things about meat is B12 is only found in foods of animal origin. So we have to get all of our dietary B12 from meat and dairy, fish, anything of animal origin. And the good thing for older people is that B12 is particularly rich in the offal meats, so things like liver and kidney. And it often seems to be older people that prefer those types of meats, so really good to fulfill their requirements. So that was a quick whiz through the lifespan, and I hope I've shown you exactly why meat is so important with all those different nutrients. And it's important to note here that some nutrients are good, but more is not necessarily better. So that's why obtaining all these nutrients from your food is so much more important than taking supplements. So a lot of things compete when we absorb them. So for example, if you're taking a calcium supplement, you'll be putting your iron status at risk because the two of them compete for absorption. So where you get these bundles of nutrients in foods, it's a much more effective and healthier way to be gaining the good nutrition that you need. So why, if beef's so jolly good, do we get a lot of media hype around eating meat and whether we should or shouldn't be? And I've been asked to cover and talk about some of the myths and misconceptions around meat. And I thought I'd start with the hardest one, because hopefully it'll get easier from here on in. Do we eat too much red meat? Well, it's a very hard question to say yes or no, because as a population, most Western countries, or most countries, don't eat more than the recommended amounts. But there's always going to be extremes. So there will be some people that eat more than is recommended, but there will be a lot of people that eat less. It's a hard one to answer categorically, but this quote from Dr. Elsie Widdowson, who was the pioneer of nutrition in Britain, and actually designed the wartime diet. And it's true to say we've probably never had a healthier diet than we did during the war, because rationing ensured we had exactly what we needed and nothing more, and hopefully nothing less. And she says, a little bit of everything and not too much of anything. But when we come to cancer, this is one that we've been dealing with around the globe for a good number of years. And in fact, one of the reasons I came to Uruguay 5.5, 6 years ago was to talk about this very issue. The good news on this one is that we can categorically say, no, red meat, including beef, does not cause cancer. Most of the evidence, or most of the types of studies that look at the links between diet and cancer are what we call epidemiological studies. And these only look at associations. And you cannot say, if two things are associated, that does not mean they cause each other. So, for example, breast cancer is associated with wearing a skirt. You're not telling me, I hope, because I'm wearing one, that wearing a skirt causes breast cancer. But the two are associated. So a lot of the reporting of research that comes out around diet and cancer makes that huge leap from if the study shows a small association. In the newspaper, you then get red meat causes cancer, carnivals meet their maker earlier, and all these very extreme headlines. But we know at the moment no single food causes cancer. The greatest dietary factor that has an influence on cancer is obesity. And we all know that obesity is caused by many different things, and there's a number of different factors. So we can be very sure that no single food causes cancer, and that includes meat. The other thing that a lot of these studies look at is risk. And in fact, some of the studies we've heard talked about over the last couple of days have talked about risk. There's a big difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And studies will often report on relative risk. So they'll say there's a 50% increased risk of X. But actually what's important is looking at what the absolute risk is. Because if the absolute risk is only 0.1%, a 50% increase in risk doesn't make it much more. So that's also something just to consider when we're looking at these studies, is actually what is the risk to us as individuals. The thing that we strive in the meat industry for more than anything is to ensure that our recommendations are based on robust science. And as a global group of meat nutritionists around the world, we work really hard to ensure that when we're making statements about meat, that they are based on robust science. And unfortunately, that's not what we see in some of the reporting of these studies and the science. So we just need to make sure we retain our credibility by using robust science. Weight loss. Does avoiding red meat help you lose weight? No, it doesn't. The good thing about meat, as we've talked about, is that it's a rich source of protein. And one of the things we know about protein is that it helps us feel full for longer. So one thing you can do to help yourselves if you're trying to lose weight, other than go out running, she says, as a keen runner, is to actually ensure that you include protein, including meat, in your meals, because that will help you feel full for longer. So again, another myth that avoiding red meat helps you lose weight. It's not true. Is red meat high in fat? One of the great things about any fat that is on meat is that you can trim most of it off because you can see it. So if you're trimming your meat, which some of you may or may not wish to, but if you do, meat really is a very lean, low-fat product. If you think about cheeses and biscuits and cakes and all dairy products really, that can be anything from 20 to 50% fat. You can't get rid of the fat that's in that. Whereas if you have a lean piece of meat, you're looking at usually about somewhere under 10% fat. Yes, with some meat, the marbling through the fat will increase the fat content slightly, but you can always get rid of the visible fat around the edge if you choose to, making it a low-fat food. So I thought that I would conclude this part with a quote from Shakespeare. Saturday is the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, which also happened to be his birthday, which I also believe might be Fabio's birthday. So we'll say happy birthday, although he's not listening, so he won't. He doesn't know that we're trying to say happy birthday to him. So I thought this quote summed up the thinking around these myths and misconceptions quite well. It's from Shakespeare's Hamlet. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And I would say that reflects quite well how these myths and misconceptions have come about, because people think them into being. And if we hear something time and time again, we tend to believe it. And unfortunately, we've suffered as a result of that in the meat industry, because people have been told so often that meat causes whatever it is, and therefore people believe it, even though the evidence does not support it. So in conclusion, I hope I've shown you that Hereford beef remains an essential part of a balanced diet. It's part of a mixed diet. We're not saying eat meat and don't eat anything else. We need to have it as part of a mixed, balanced diet. I've shown you how most of the myths, or the myths I've chosen to share with you, are largely unfounded. And because it's what I would call nature's power pack, beef certainly contributes or provides something for everyone, whatever their age. Thank you.